This episode is made possible by our partners Convert.com, Online Dialogue, SiteSpect, Online Influence Institute, Content Square, and VWO. My name is Guido Jansen and welcome to the Xero Cafe podcast. Today I talk with Merritt, Optimization Director at Search Discovery, and we're going to learn how you can responsibly peek at your data mid-experiment and why we think machines won't be replacing zeros anytime soon. In case you missed the previous episode, last time I spoke with Derek Gleason from CXL about their yearly survey on all things Xero, like salaries and the tools that we use. You can listen to that episode on www.xero.cafe or in the podcast app you're listening with right now. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 49. So Merritt, thank you so much for joining the Xero Cafe podcast. And first, of course, we'd like to know a bit more about you. So could you enlighten us to start with, why are you still working at Xero?
Yeah, and that's the key word there is still, right? Because it's been about 10 years for me. I think I go back to when I got into CRO, and I stumbled my way into it actually when I was in college doing a graduate degree. But what I immediately loved about it was the breadth of demand of skills that went into CRO, right? Like there's the analysis part of things, there's the technical part of things and the coding, there's the statistics part of things, there's the creativity part of things, right? And what you're presenting to people and how you're solving problems. And there's the visual and design part of things. And then all of that gets the method by which that happens is you have to be good at project management and sort of business skills. And not only is all of that relevant to CRO, but it rewards you if you're good at, have some breadth in all of those things. So I've always been a little bit of a jack of all trades. I don't have formal training in any of those things, but I have a lot of interest in all of them.
That's interesting about many people calling themselves Xero specialists, right? It should be Xero generalist.
Pretty much. Yeah. I'd make a terrible statistician, a terrible developer, a terrible designer, and probably a terrible general business person. But you put all those things together, and I'm just dangerous enough in all of them to, I think, be decent at my job.
Yeah. And you're still working in it. So do you expect in 10 years we will have the same conversation? You're still working in Xero. Do you think things have changed? Not necessarily for you personally, but in the field, what Xero means?
I don't know. I think they may kick me out by then. I mean, what I just said about what makes the field really interesting to me and like the diversity of skills and challenges, those challenges continue. But I honestly think it'd be hard for someone to follow that pathway today and be sort of a generalist. I think as experimentation becomes a bigger part of the DNA of organizations, that it will require more specialization, right? Because more people will have like the general knowledge of how to do things, and you'll just need people who are really good at one particular thing. That's kind of if I look into the future, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And to give people some context, you're optimization director at Search Discovery. What do you do?
That's a great question. I wish I could say.
What do you say at parties when people ask you what you do? When you have a family reunion, what do you do, Merritt?
Yeah, actually, one of my favorite things to ask my family is, "What do you guys think I do for a living?" And you get all sorts of answers from make stuff online, design. People think I design websites. I don't design websites. No, I tell people that I run experiments on people who don't know they're getting experiments run on them on the internet when they visit websites and applications. But on a day-to-day basis, my job is working with clients mainly to set up and operate optimization programs. So that sometimes that involves executing experiments, not nearly as much as I would like, because I think that's the really fun part of the job. A lot of the times it's just working with organizations to figure out how to set up the capability inside their organization. Sometimes it's just troubleshooting or support in some ways, or office hours. But there's a little bit of everything. No 2 days are the same.
Yeah. And one of the things you've been working on lately is building an A/B test calculator. Please tell us why we should be using yours and not all the others. You're not the only one with an A/B test calculator. Let's be fair. So why did you feel this urge to build your own?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't care if you use mine or the others.
No, you made it to scratch your own itch.
I'm pretty darn sure I'm the number one user of my own calculator here. So I can tell you who I built it for.
Yeah.
No, I've been using calculators that have been free and available online for years, and I rely on them to do my job effectively. And there's some great resources out there, and I mean, and the list of resources only grows. So I'm not trying to do all and be all to everyone's needs, but I will say, sequential testing, I don't know how deeply you want to get into this, but it was something that I actually just started out wanting to understand at a deeper level, right? To get the statistics a little bit better. I've used a number of calculators out there. I have front row seat to when Optimizely went to a sequential stats engine is how they framed it. I've been a user of the analytics toolkit. .com resources and the agile calculator that Jorgi built there. I've used Evan Miller's sequential, simple sequential calculator, but all of those I wanted to understand a little more, and I wanted to kind of be able to self-serve. So I got into this, and I think to my knowledge, this is the only one that is free and could be called kind of robust out there today. So I'm sure that won't last for long, but right now I think it's a unique resource, and like I said, I use it all the time. So
for those that are not familiar, what is specific about sequential A/B testing?
Right. So if you're anything like me, at some point you heard you can't peak on your tests, and that was a revelation to me the first time I heard it, because I was peaking on my tests because the testing tools that I was using, they encouraged us to do it, right? Even today, like some of the biggest testing tools out there are showing you stats that aren't valid because they're showing you they're running the test constantly every time you look at it, and so that's peaking. That's not how fixed horizon testing works, which is the breed of testing that most of us use. The alternative to that would be Bayesian testing, but I don't have the wits to go down that road, and neither do I have the stamina for it today. But in the testing that most of us are used to, you create a sample size plan, and you're supposed to stick to that sample size. You're supposed to not look at the results, at least not calculate a statistical result until you collect the full sample size. So by peaking, you increase your error rate, your type 1 error rate. And that's a problem. And even peaking, say like every 10% of your sample size, you may go from like a 10% type 1 error rate to a 30% type 1 error rate over the course of your test.
Yeah.
And that's with a flat result. So peaking is bad, and sequential testing basically allows you to peak responsibly. It allows you to guarantee that you maintain that type 1 error rate as you go through a test and look at the results.
Yeah.
And I like to say that like it's useful. Peaking is useful in the face of extreme results. MDE, minimum detectable effect, minimum effective interest, whatever, that is the thing we don't know much about before we run a test.
But what you need to calculate your sample size.
Yes. We've created this whole test design around this thing that we know so little about. Yeah. If there's one thing we learn in testing, it's that we have no freaking clue what the outcome of something is going to be. We don't know if it's going to be good or bad or really good, and the most surprising results are where testing becomes most valuable. So so acknowledging that that's like the hardest thing to predict, and then giving yourself a tool to run an efficient test regardless of what that thing is, what that impact is. That's why sequential testing is really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the exact same or the exact case today actually, where they wanted to test 3 or 4 variants of a promotion on the website. And normally, when you see promotions on the website, their default was okay, you can get this amount of discounts, but only when you order this from this amount. Like you can get 25% discount, but only if you order €50 or over 100 euros. And that's the default. And wanted to test one of the variants was, okay, you get this discount, period, without any requirement of minimum order value. And the local team said, well, this is very risky. We can do the test, but maybe let's do it only at 1% of the number of visitors. Of course, I'm like, okay, but then the test is going to run forever. We don't have the sample size to pull that off. So we need to do it equal split. But then they come with the requirements, say, okay, but then we need to have some stopping measures in place. I mean, we want to run the test for 4 weeks, but after 1 week, we already find out, okay, this is going very extremely in a negative way. We need to be able to stop this. So this is a perfect case for sequential testing, I think. So how would you go about validating this and testing if this is a reason, if it's big enough to stop?
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly one of the key use cases for sequential testing. And I didn't mention this, but like,
I mean, let's be clear. I don't mind. Personally, I would just let the test go for 4 weeks and then see what happens. But business teams might think differently.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I see a lot is people checking in on a test early on, right? Like you're a couple to 5% into the sample and you're checking to see if anything catastrophic is happening.
Yep.
A lot of times I don't see people having like a good framework for saying, okay, what is catastrophic in this case?
Yep.
Like, is this decline that I'm seeing, is this significant enough to be concerned about? And the other thing you get out of sequential testing is a rubric by which to measure a decline early on, and to determine if that's a statistically significant decline or not, right? Like one of the concepts in at least in my sequential calculator and many others is a futility boundary. Like, should you give up early? And so, yeah, so in your case or in many others, right, like being able to say, okay, we'll plan the test. This is the maximum duration of the test, but we're going to check in on it early on 5% just to see if there's anything really extreme going on in the results. And, you know, hopefully you're using something like a decision plan upfront where you can say, if we cross this boundary, then we're going to pull the plug, or we're going to, you know, that's what we'll call a significant decline. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. Even if it's, you know, down 5%, if that's not past our futility boundary, we're going to stick with it.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it's quite difficult to include such a boundary in your calculations, but because it can be different for each test, right? I mean, it can be, of course, it can be revenue based. If you go down 5%, then that's the boundary. But maybe my experiment is not about revenue at all. Maybe it's about newsletter subscribers. Then you might be, okay, we're not necessarily losing money, so it's fine if it goes down 10%.
So that's actually a really good point. There is a confession time. There are many different ways to do sequential testing, and if you start reading the literature on it, it becomes a little overwhelming because, like, I don't know, like all stats literature, there's like all these names that could Pocock, you know, Brian Fleming, and I can't even pronounce some of the names because they're very foreign to me. But you know, all these people have come up with different methods of approaching sequential testing. Some of them are more conservative than others. And those who are providing calculators have actually made some decisions about how conservative those methods are going to be. I actually hope to, at some point, allow someone to shift those parameters a little bit to take something that's more conservative or less conservative in terms of their approach to the decision boundaries. As of right now, it's kind of fixed. I have been pretty transparent about like how those parameters are set. Those are fairly technical details in the test design, but like it's good for us to know that there are just like when you're designing the test and you're saying, okay, what's my what confidence do I need, and what power do I need, and like what's my MDE? That there are a lot more parameters to your test that you can configure to say this is how aggressive my decision boundary needs to be, and usually it ends up affecting the shape of it. And I realize we're talking about this kind of abstractly. It'd be easier if we were just looking at one of these decision boundaries and could kind of point to it, but yeah, it's kind of like you said. You do need a pretty diverse toolkit to approach these things because the problems are different and your risk levels are going to be different. And
so for people to need specifically your sequential test calculator, what kind of data do they need to have as input?
There's only one thing you need to prepare that's in excess of what you normally need for just a normal fixed horizon test. And that is you need to plan out the number of check-ins or the number of analyses that you're going to do on the data, right? So I usually plan something that's like, check in like once or twice a week on the data. And usually the reason you're doing a sequential test is because you're looking at a pretty long test horizon, like something like 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks or whatever. And so sequential tests can help you get to an answer more efficiently. But yeah, so other than that, it's your alpha, which is 1 minus your confidence level. It's your beta, which is 1 minus your power, or vice versa, however you want to look at those. It's your base conversion rate, the base rate that you're building off of, or your mean if it's a continuous metric. By the way, my calculator does not yet support continuous metrics. So
like
that's
revenue
right now. Yep, like revenue. Yep. We'll get to it eventually. But yeah, base rate, you need the minimum detectable effect or minimum effective interest or effect size or however you want to title that one. And your tails. And you actually get a fairly different test design if you select 2-tail versus 1-tail. I know that's probably a topic we could chat on our nerdy selves about all day. Yeah. Everyone wants to talk 2-tail, 1-tail. But yeah, normally I go 1-tail. If it's 2-tail, the boundaries look a little bit different. But beyond that, there are some optional inputs, right? Like we have support to put in your current traffic size for your test area, like how much traffic you get in a week, a month, or whatever. And then you can kind of estimate how many days it's going to take you. Just it's just a utility function. It's not necessary, but it's helpful.
Yeah. And is it possible? So can you explain to us why does it matter how often I peak? I mean, my test is going to run for 4 weeks. How often I peak is not going to change the results. So why does it matter for the calculations for the calculator that I predetermine how often I peak?
So I will tell you right now, I'm going to fail at explaining this easily. This is one of those things that, like, if you don't get it, it's really hard to understand in abstract. And then once you get it, you instantaneously lose the ability to communicate that effectively to someone who doesn't. It's just, it just happens, right?
Give it a shot.
So there's actually in basic probability that you learn, there's the probability of a thing happening. Let's say like probability of you getting a heads if you flip a coin, right? 50% if it's an unweighted coin. Okay, but what's the probability of you getting a heads if you flip a coin twice? I should know this offhand, but there's a really simple calculation for doing that. It's like it compounds. The probability of you getting a heads compounds. And it's the same thing in testing, right? The probability of you getting a false positive the first time you check on your data is at whatever confidence level you're setting for your test. And that's actually kind of interesting to know because a lot of us think like you have to wait until the end of the test to check your data before you can assure your false positive rate or assure that you have the right confidence level. But that's not true. You can look at data after you've collected 50 samples and run a t-test on it. And if it says that you're 90% confident, you can be 90% confident that you don't have a false negative there or false positive there. So that doesn't change. However, if you run that test then and then run that test in a week, you've just increased your odds of having a false positive, just like you flipping a coin twice. Your odds of getting ahead have increased. And so every successive time that you run the test, and I realize like we're mincing words a little bit, like running the test can be considered collecting your full sample size, but running the test is also, it's just calculating the test statistic, the z-score, the, whatever your test statistic is. So every time you calculate that test statistic, you are giving yourself another chance at a false outcome.
Yeah.
I think I've done a terrible job of explaining that, but
no, I think it was good.
You're going to fact check this afterwards, right?
We'll put it in the show notes. This is the actual description. Now, so where is it often, even when people know this, where it goes wrong?
I think I can't say that people make a ton of bad decisions, but I can say that they're not controlling their error rates. They don't know which decisions are bad.
Yeah.
The fact that there are error rates to begin with guarantees that we're going to make bad decisions at some point. It's a question of like the rate of bad decisions that you're making, or the rate of your ignorance in your decision making, and it goes to an unquantified amount.
Yeah, basically, you need to determine how comfortable are you with being wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're peaking, if you're not using a sequential method, or you're not doing something to control your errors, you're just not quantifying that precision in your decision making. So, I mean, I would say the biggest issue that you'll find is that people in making decisions early, well, for one, they're going to favor like. I guess this is true in all sequential testing, but you're favoring large effects, and you're probably inflating, like you're biasing your effect sizes upwards. And so where you may have a confidence interval of like, this could be a change from between 1% to 30%, your mid-rate, your mean change is probably going to be higher than it actually is on average. Like if you were to say like, I'm taking 20 winners and the average effect size in these winners was 10%, if you've been using a sequential method, you've probably biased that upwards, and it's actually much lower than that.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the case whether you're using a sequential method or not. If you're peaking, you're going to be responding to higher effect sizes than actually exist.
Okay. Are there scenarios where you would still say, please don't use sequential testing, just let the test run anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, one example, maybe I'm wrong, but if there's some kind of cycle, if there's some cyclic data in your in the behavior of your clients, I can imagine that might make sense where you expect, for example, different behavior in the first 2 weeks versus the second 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, I think absolutely that's a consideration that you've got to put the lens of like business cycles and seasonality and stuff over your data. That's not necessarily a reason, in my view, to not do sequential testing, because, just because those cycles exist doesn't mean you want to ignore a really negative result. For example, like I think even if you have tons of traffic and, reaching sample size in a reasonable amount of time is not an issue. And in fact, you're like testing on smaller subsets of the data because you have so much traffic and you want to be able to run a test for a week because, I do typically recommend people run a test for at least a week, maybe even 2 weeks is probably preferable. So you get a couple of those at least short business cycles in. But you still want to make, things can tank and do really, really poorly. And that can be evident early on. And so having the statistical calculation that you can make early on in the test is still valuable. But you're right. Like if you haven't run a test for a week, you should think twice about ending the test early on a negative result, because you may not have seen a good cross section of your users. You're never going to have a sample of future users, right? Like every time we sample users, we're assuming that it represents all users today and all users tomorrow. But you do want to make an effort, and that's why we'll try to run through a business cycle or two to try to get a more representative sample. So
yeah, And well, you already mentioned that we can discuss for hours in the comments on one-tailed versus two-tailed. And then, of course, we have maybe the even bigger frequentist versus Bayesian. This only works for frequentist?
No, doesn't only work. In fact, so I use an R package to make the application work, the sequential calculator work, and that R package actually supports Bayesian testing. We're gonna hit real fast like the limits of my expertise with statistics, because I have a couple books on Bayesian stats, and as hard as it is to read a stats book to begin with.
No, I didn't want to go into Bayesian versus frequentist. I just want to know, is sequential testing purely something that's limited to people doing frequentist experiments, or can we both benefit?
Yeah, no, I mean, they do apply to Bayesian stats, and there is support, again, in the R package that I use for it. I don't grok it as well. And I also know that, there's a lot of, hard feelings is maybe the wrong answer, but there's a lot of criticism about Bayesian stats in the way they present the statistics and the way they sort of make known the assumptions that are going into those stats. Yeah. And so people will say that Bayesian stats are immune to peaking, and that's maybe glossing over some of the details a little bit, right? It's not completely true. You still do need to worry about type 1 error rates. Bayesian statisticians will say, like, or people who are pro Bayesian, they'll say like the probability, the test stat is valid all the time. Like it's always, whereas in frequentist stats, that p-value does not always tell the truth. Yeah. They'll say that the stat you get from Bayesian is always true, is always right. And again, I think that glosses over some of the detail and the assumptions that are being made in Bayesian stats. So
yeah. To me, it feels like sequential testing is a good mix between wanting to be the more rigorous method, which is frequentist in my view. The more rigorous method, also something I grew up with. This is what we use mainly at universities when we ran experiments. But also, you wanted to make the whole process to make business sense, right? We're not applying this to just do science and figure out exactly what's happening. You also want to make business decisions here, and this is a good way to at least capture those moments where things can go wrong quickly if you're not careful, and then you're actually losing a lot of money.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and it's funny to say like sequential testing is kind of a way to get some of those the benefits that people tout from Bayesian testing, but to do it in like the language and the format that you're used to. It's like the stats you grew up with, the frequentist stats. It's the stats you learned in college, right? And that's a funny way to look at why people do it. Maybe there's just a bunch of inertia behind it, but I think I'm with you on that, and I certainly take some cues from the medical and the research communities that seem to overwhelmingly favor frequentist stats.
Yeah. So, what would you say? Well, stepping back a bit, you said that you've been doing this for over 10 years now. What are there any insights you think you've gathered in those 10 years that other people, maybe in CRO or in e-commerce in general, haven't picked up on yet?
I'm a little bit cynical, I guess. I've had too many servings of humble pie to be too overconfident about any single one of my opinions. But here's one of the things that sticks with me. Someone asked Daniel Kahneman. He's the thinking fast and slow. He's the granddaddy of biases and heuristics, right? Someone asked him once if understanding the biases that he did, the follies in human thinking, if that made him more resilient to those biases, and he said no, not really. And I think that's true of us in the CRO community, right? Like we tend to look for ways to exploits maybe too loaded of a term, but we look for ways to speak to some of those biases and to work within the system of human psychology. And you would think that we'd be really good at sort of understanding how our own thinking is flawed. And I think we're not. And I think that manifests itself in myriad ways in the way we approach our work. But one of those is sometimes we see what we make emotional decisions. We live in a world of data, and we use that data like a security blanket, right? Like it makes us feel good about the decisions we're making. But I think there's a propensity for us to make emotional decisions still, and to use the data as a weapon to rationalize those emotional decisions. And I've seen it in my own work. I've seen it in other people's work, where you take these hard numbers and these stats, and you just put enough spin on it, enough of a personal interpretation on it. I mean, that's where a lot of like p hacking comes from. And even if you like build up more and more sophisticated stats methods to make your conclusion seem more bulletproof, like opinion still seeps in. And I think that's something we have to actively combat throughout our careers, maybe babysit others as well. But I mean, that's my opinion, is that there's way too much opinion in all the work that we do, as much as we want to believe that, we're using cold numbers to make decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, there should be an app that warns you for all the fallacies that you're, all the biases that you have. It's probably not there yet. Yeah. Exactly. Well, in my experience, it does help if you talk a lot with people doing the same as you do, but outside of your company. The interest groups, of course, nowadays everything online. Maybe it's a Facebook group for you, or a Slack group for people doing zero, or meetup.com when we're back to doing that, and talk to those people to figure out and discuss the experiments that you run with them. I think that always that helps me to figure those out, or to get a hint at where I'm going wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another thing that comes to mind. You talk about like insights that, let's call these opinions that I have that maybe aren't like universally shared. It's maybe a safer way to present that. But sure. I like to say that ideas are a dime a dozen. In CRO, we learn a lot, again, about those same biases and the tactics that work, and the heuristics that we should evaluate a page with, and like, how design works, and how colors work, how words work, and the impact they have on consumers and people as they experience different user interfaces. But at the end of the day, right, like our ability to use those things to actually make a difference to business metrics is pretty bad. Like we need to know that stuff, and it makes our ideas better. But going from a 25% win rate to a 35% win rate is still a 35% win rate.
Yeah, it's still worse than just flipping a coin.
Ideas, yeah, 7 out of 10 of your ideas are still not good. So again, the humble pie that I've eaten over the years, I have to remind myself constantly, whenever I hear someone sharing an idea that I think is absolutely terrible, right? Well, poorly reasoned, like just like in bad taste, like I have to remind myself that, you know what, my ideas aren't any better. I've put my weight behind stuff that I thought like was sure to win and flopped, made no difference. Yeah. We're just not that good at finding the solution the first time. Not to say that it's not worth putting in the hard work to learn about what tends to work, what should work. At the end of the day, our ideas just aren't that great. And so like when I find myself arguing with other CROs about like what tests should we move forward with, or like how should we prioritize this idea, like, man, we should just all like do ourselves a favor and acknowledge that, like, yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. So I have a statement for you then. if your win rate is 35% or up, you're not testing enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, most of the organizations that I work with aren't testing enough, because once they have learned to flex that muscle really well and really quickly, they don't need a consultant or an agency to come in and like show them how to do it anymore. Like they're beyond us. So, I mean, those are just the problems that I work with on a daily basis. But yeah, I mean, the mature organizations, those that run a lot of tests, their win rates go way down.
Yeah.
Way down, 1 in 10, maybe even less than that. And that should tell us something, right?
Yeah, I think the public number Booking.com always uses in their presentations is 1 in 10. And I know from Microsoft they do all these automated tests, right? So on their Bing search engine, and it's like 1 in a couple of thousand experiments that actually move the needle upward.
And I've heard people like Ton Wessling say on stage that, our ideas are so bad that we shouldn't even bother with them. Like, the future of CRO is letting the machine try every single iteration of an experience and just let the machine do it, because, we are limited in what we can think might work. And we bring a whole bunch of baggage behind us of assumptions that may not be right. And so just, letting a machine take care of design is the future of CRO. I don't know that I agree with that. Again, I do think it's worth putting in the hard work to understand how brains work, how interfaces work, what's good design, what's bad design, what tactics we should try, what other people have tested and works well. I do think it's worth like educating ourselves on that. But yeah, I mean, especially the more tests you run and the more you reach that local maximum, which is like you're actually optimized, the harder those wins are to find.
Yeah. So I ran an experiment with that same Ton Wessling a couple of years ago with it was then called Sentient AI, this evolutionary algorithm AI A/B testing or multivariate testing platform, and but the thing is that you can feed it all these. Basically, it's like a multi-arm bandit algorithm in separate stages. But the limitation those machines still have, I think, is that of course they can find the optimum solution of the variant you give it, but where's that input come from? Do you think we will still, as CRO people, will still be valuable that way? So we can give the machine, maybe the machine can figure it out and do all that and completely automate it. But are we still needed in the future to figure out what the machine is going to test to begin with?
And the more power you give to that machine to just operate independently, right? It's literally going to move every pixel to every point on the screen. and it may learn very quickly that way, right? Of like what works and where that pixel needs to be. But somebody out there is going to see, Greek letters where in an English setting, right? Like somebody is going to see something that doesn't make any sense that a human could very easily say, hold on, no, we're not going to try that one. But operate within these boundaries. So I don't see like the machines taking over completely anytime soon. They're just not smart enough to get the first couple iterations right. Like they have to be trained and learn. I don't know. Maybe there's some solution out there where you can have like the trainer set internally that helps the machine like learn some basics, and then from there it can just go wild. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
But I also wonder, like, here's the other limitation, right? You have to be really, really, really confident that the metric you're optimizing for encompasses everything that you're interested in. And that's even a problem today in our decision making, right? Where you may find something that's ugly and hideous and, evokes a gut-wrenching response from people, but it's super effective at drawing clicks or getting people to check out or getting people to accidentally enter in their credit card information and buy. And you're just not measuring the metric of like, how do they feel when they see that? Or like, what's their likelihood of coming back 6 months from now to buy from me again, or next year to buy from me again? So whereas those metrics are always seem to be just a little out of reach, and we want to acknowledge them and use them in our decision-making models. If you just set a machine to optimize for that stuff, it's not going to take every data point into account. I don't know.
Yeah, you probably, and that's what a lot of CROs are struggling with. You probably want to optimize for lifetime value, but that's not a metric that you can often, you don't have that available in Google Analytics or whatever you use to analyze your A/B tests for. So you have to settle for proxies like conversion rate or average order value or revenue per visitor or whatever you're doing it with. But it's very short term what we're optimizing for right now.
Yeah. Or what if you're like what if you're a luxury brand, right? And like just
you only have 5 clients.
And like and the feeling of it, the feeling of what you're presenting is like every bit as important as the action that the user takes, right? Like you have to prioritize how people experience your brand. And if you just run a test on conversion rate, like that's not what you're necessarily optimizing for.
Yeah, and so if you're listening to this is basically the survival instinct of 2 people working in CRO, trying to figure out how our job can still exist in 10 years. We're desperately looking for ways to figure out, okay, this is not going to happen. This is machines can never replace
arguments and discussions. I mean, how many of us have tried to dictate something to our phone, and like, I don't know about you, but like for me, there are certain words that every time I say the word COME, come on over here, it'll say cone. It'll write down cone. Even when I'm typing it in, cone, every single time. Now, every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, no, the machines aren't coming for us anytime soon. We're good. We're fine.
I have that on my main frustration that pops up right now is that I think it's mainly LinkedIn. When I try to reply to someone on a message that they sent, I think it's even like the public post, and I try to mention them, and then there's all this big list of people that have the same starting letter, but it's not the person that wrote this post. I'm like, that should be the most obvious one, right? Why is that not there?
We're safe.
So no, we're all safe. The next 10 years, we're good. Yeah, very good. So back to your calculator. You just released version 2. What's going to happen in the next 12 months? Is there going to be a version 3? Is there already a roadmap?
I do have sort of a backlog of ideas and features and stuff that I'd like to work in. I'm really excited about some of the things that came out in V2, some stuff to geek out about. But yeah, next 12 months, I do want to put in support for continuous metrics. It's not that hard. It's just one of those things that takes the time to do it and kind of reframe everything, and then working that into the user interface. Honestly, for me though, I didn't set out to like build this tool set. I kind of set out to just understand things better, and it took me to, well, I need a tool to be able to do what I want here.
Scratching your own itch, but that's a great way to start, right?
Yeah, and I think there are a number of other tools that could be valuable in our space. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is that simulating data it can actually improve your decision making. If you can see the way scenarios play out, you kind of see the impact and the weight of what you're doing. I think back to in fact, simulation was one of the ways that I got into this in the first place. Is I wanted to know what happened when people peaked. I wanted to know what the actual impact of peaking was.
Yeah.
And the only way I could figure out how to do that was to like simulate a bunch of data and look at different scenarios and like what happened if someone peaked after like 50% of the sample versus after 10% of the sample. I'm like, I actually thought there maybe was like, this is how dumb I am. I thought there was maybe some way that like you could have like a rule of thumb on how to peak without messing up your stats. And that's not the case. Don't do it. But Yeah, I mean, I think there's some tools and stuff that we could add into different calculators that would give people an ability to simulate data and see how those things play out. I also, from a personal perspective, next 12 months, I do want to get through those Bayesian books. I've read so many articles and I don't know, I'm just thick skulled with this stuff. But yeah, I want to be able to give you a clearer answer on how you use sequential testing Bayesian stats next year. So
yeah. Good. So to continue on that, any other things you're reading, or what we tip for our listeners to develop themselves in this area?
Yeah, a couple of things. The number of bloggers and content creators out there has just blossomed in the past 5 years in terms of experimentation. If you go on Medium, and even if you only do a free subscription, the amount of A/B testing content on Medium is huge. I get a weekly digest, and there's new articles every week from people that I've never heard of. A lot of more common experimentation blogs are on there. Netflix does their stuff on Medium. So I'd say go subscribe to a couple topics of interest on Medium and see what comes out on a weekly or daily digest. The other thing that I think is really astonishingly good, Alex Burkett over the past year has been building up some of the content on his personal blog, alexburkett.com, and his stuff is really good. It's really thorough and well thought out, and he comes at it from someone who has learned in the trenches. So his blog is a great place for someone to actually get started today in understanding A/B testing, because it really spans the breadth. It's comprehensive.
Nice. And what does he do? He's a zero specialist, right?
What is he doing today? I think he's doing his own. He's like a freelance today. He's kind of doing his own company. But he's been a writer. He worked for HubSpot. He worked for CXL. I think he did a bunch of content for CXL, and then he's just he's been putting out great stuff.
Speaking of people, who should we invite for another podcast episode?
Have you spoken to Matt Gershoff?
Not yet.
Okay, you need to get Gershoff. Don't tell him I told you that. No, Matt is great. He owns and runs Conductrix. He's very present in the industry, and he's just a thoughtful. He's a kind guy. As rough as he is around the edges, as prickly as he is around the edges sometimes, and he'll tell you that. No, he's very very smart guy, very willing to educate people, and he's just a clear thinker about a lot of things. So
good to know. Well, I'll connect him, and I'll tell him you told him to come on the show. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Merritt. Things really interesting, and I'm definitely looking forward to the Bayesian updates of your tool. My final question for you: how often do you peak personally? What's your rule for it? We want to know.
Remember, peaking is just when you calculate the statistics. So, no, I use the sequential method in almost every test that I design for clients, and the only time I don't is when there's a stats engine with the test tool that I trust and that I think is putting out good stuff. So, there are some tools out there that I think have good stats methods behind them, but for the most part, I'm doing all of it offline using my own calculator. So I peak frequently.
You can name names. Let's just not name the bad ones, but if there are good ones, we want to know.
Google Optimize has a Bayesian engine, and they're not completely straightforward with it. And there are a lot of gotchas with their stats, but I tend to trust their engine. I trust Optimizely's engine as well. I trust VWO's engine. Conductrix is great on the machine learning side, and I trust their stats engine. The problem with some of the others, it's not that it's not that their stats are wrong. It's that they're easy to abuse.
Yeah.
Right. It's that like, you can't just, I think of it in terms of like, can I send my client there to get results? Like, can I share this with them and let them like interpret it as they want to every time? And I don't do that with Target. I don't do that with anything that's frequentist that doesn't have some adjustment or some sort of mechanism to stop them from interpreting a test statistic before the sample size has been collected.
Fair enough.
So,
thank you so much, Merritt, and hope to talk to you soon.
You bet. It was fun.
Thanks. Bye-bye. And this concludes Season 2, Episode 49 of the Zero Cafe podcast with Merritt Aho from Search Discovery. Next episode, I talk with Chad Sanderson, Head of Product and Data Platform at Convoy, about why they have built their own experimentation platform instead of just buying one, what the differences are between an innovation culture and an experimentation culture, and what you need to take into account when running offline experiments. Talk to you then, and always be optimizing.